Thank you. Thanks, John. Welcome to our first ad hoc committee on gang violence and youth development post now Congressman Tony Cardenas, who I committed to taking on his role as being a champion on City Council for gang intervention, prevention, and youth development. I want to publicly continue to thank Tony for his hard work in this important issue here in the city of Los Angeles, and now he's fighting for us in Washington, D.C. I am grateful to Council President Herb Wesson for allowing me to serve in this capacity. This is an important issue, as I've seen and I've dealt with for many, many years with the Los Angeles Police Department. I get the importance of gang intervention, prevention, of youth development, and I've seen the impacts of gang violence in our city, in our communities, and I've just been blessed to be given this opportunity to continue Tony's work on City Council and work hand in hand with Guillermo Cespedes from the GRID office and the mayor's office. Guillermo and I have had a number of discussions over the last several months. I know we had to get through budget and finance and get through the budget, but thank you, Guillermo, for all the work you and your team continue to do for our city. It's so important to have this collaboration and partnership with your office and the respective council offices as well. I also want to turn to my team, Jenny Chavez and Michael De La Rocha, for being there and agreeing to be a part of this movement in the city of Los Angeles. And Michael, you've done just tremendous work working for Tony across city lines, and I want to publicly thank you for your ongoing commitment to this issue. And it's great to see in the audience our community representing parts of the city from the harbor area to the valley to East Los Angeles to the Mid-Wilshire District. Thank you, and we bless you and thank you for taking on this role. You may be out in the streets as a gang intervention worker. You may be a part of a community-based organization to make every effort to prevent violent crime from occurring in our city. And we just say thank you for being here. If you do want to speak on a non-agenda item, please be sure to fill out a card. John, you would have those cards on the back table next to Marco. Thanks for being here as well, Marco. So with that, we're going to dive into a presentation from the Mayor's GRID office, and of course our outgoing Mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, who's just been a champion in this issue in the last 8 years. If you look at the incredible reduction in violence in the last 8 years, since his tenure, it's like the best reduction in numbers since the 1950s, I was told. Yes. And we attribute that success not only to the hard work of the men and women in the Los Angeles Police Department, but also to the community. We see a new police department who we've worked so hard in instilling and bringing back that faith, trust, and confidence in the community and the police department. And of course, we attribute the reduction of violence because of the efforts of the GRID office as well. So, Guillermo, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
I'll send it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Council Member, and Michael for your work in the past, and Jenny. What I'm going to do is go through a few slides to give an overall view of the office, and then we'll do some questions. I think most people know that what GRID was mandated to do was to start a place-based strategy. There's 12 GRID zones, 1 in Central, 3 in East LA, 6 in South LA, and 2 in the Valley. There are secondary zones that we also serve, and I'll explain what a secondary zone is. And there is 8 of them. What's a GRID zone? Basically, they were chosen by this. Approximately average is 3.5 square miles, 40% higher level of gang crime than other parts of the city. 40% of the population is youth under 18. 55% of the youth in foster care, attend schools in those zones. 31% of the youth on probation, and almost 30% of the families live below the poverty level. By the way, an interesting piece of data that's not there is that anywhere between 29 and 40% of those youth, the grandparents are financially responsible for them. So that's kind of an overall profile of a grid zone. When the grid office started, these are the 4 levels that it's been attempting to develop effective strategies are at. Level 4 is just the general at-risk population in the grid zones. Level 3 is those 10 to 15-year-olds in the grid zones that are at the highest risk of becoming gang members. Now, how is that determined? There was a very controversial tool. I say controversial because a lot of us were very critical of it when it started, that identifies risk factors, and it's completely research-driven. So that's level 3. By the way, in the highest risk neighborhoods, the lowest estimate is 3%, the highest estimate is 15% that become gang members. So it's not every kid in every grid zone. And that's been helpful also for law enforcement because it doesn't mean blanketing the neighborhood. Level 2, the most active gang members, and that's primarily what intervention works with, gang intervention works with. Level 3 is, we call it secondary prevention, and that's what our prevention providers do. And level 1 is frankly what I think is the hardest challenge for everyone across the country and literally across the world, is how to deal with seriously offending folks that are primarily in and out of prison. We look at 2 programs that cut across all 4 levels. One is Summer Night Lights, and the other one is the law enforcement engagement piece. So what happens in a grid zone is all these different programs get implemented, and I'm not going to go through each single program, but I'm going to highlight 3 of them. 1, the secondary prevention. 2, the Summer Night Lights. And the other one is the intervention component that is directed at interrupting violence. So these are the strategies that get implemented in each grid zone, and each strategy is being evaluated. This gives you a quick view of what the collaboration, the primary collaboration in a grid zone. These are the partners that we actually on a daily basis collaborate with. Brecon Parks, LAPD, council office, schools, intervention implementer, whoever that might be in that zone, and housing in the places that the grid zones that have a housing development. Secondary prevention, what is it? 10 to 15-year-olds. The risk factors get measured by a tool called the Y-set. I call it the thermometer. This thermometer measures risk factors. And then the medicine that gets applied is actually a family-based approach that focuses on multiple generations. And the goal is to reduce risk factors. This is what's happened. This is a sample of 2,200 youth. 56% of them, when they got retested, were no longer at that high level of risk. And I think this piece probably will require an additional briefing. So this tool, by the way, is now being piloted not only in various cities across the country, but in Latin America, Central America in particular. Violence interruption, we call it the triangle protocol. Every time there's an incidence of violence, of course, gang intervention responds, law enforcement responds, and a member of our staff responds. And what's the role of each person? Well, obviously the police focuses on the investigation, intervention focuses on retaliation, preventing retaliation. Our office focuses on assisting victims, sometimes, and sometimes supporting intervention in assisting victims, and basically serves as an information bridge. Between April 09
So as far as assisting victims, you have members of your team that roll out every time there's a critical incident.
Correct. So between April 09 and December 2012, there's been 2,500 of those incidents that we have tracked by responding in real time. Most of our work with intervention workers, for the most part, this part of the work takes place during the response. This is what's happened in the grid zones, and we believe that this violence interruption approach is in part responsible for it. We're comparing 2007 to 2012, 46% reduction in homicides. This is inside the grid zones. 40% reduction in aggravated assault, 66% reduction in assaults with a deadly weapon on a police officer. Rape, 10% reduction, robbery, 43%, carjacking, 54%, kidnapping. If you look at the numbers, we went from 6 to 8, but that's an increase of 33%. Shots that go into houses, 30% reduction, 100% reduction in arson, but that's only one incident. Criminal threats have gone up by 4, have been reduced by 4, and extortion has gone up. We've had 1 extortion more in 2012 than in 2007. This, I think, is an important piece of data. Shots fired and victims shot. If less shots get fired, less people will die. So 50% reduction in shots fired, 44% reduction in victims shot.
Again, specifically, these are numbers within the grid zones.
Within the grid zones. We're now doing a comparison of the grid zone to corresponding county areas that do not have grid services. And it took quite a
Why
bit.
county, not corresponding city areas that don't have grid zones?
Excuse me?
So why aren't we comparing, because not the entire city is a grid zone, right?
Well, the reason for that is that we already assume that a grid zone has a 40% higher level of gang crime.
Oh, so we know that
rest
within
of
the
the
city.
city.
Got it.
So it's not comparing apples to apples, as they say. So we had to go to the county, work with the sheriff to get data on comparison, zones that compare to the grid zones, so that we can compare the reduction.
Got it. And the county's been instrumental. They've embraced this.
They've embraced it. It took a little bit of time to get the data. The data is being analyzed now.
I see.
What we do see so far is that violence, the graph that shows violence going down is steeper in the grid zones than in the not county areas.
Got it.
So that's about gang crime. However, we think gang crime is just basically one measure of what we should be looking at. Summer Night Lights program, everybody's very familiar with that. I think it's become probably one of the more effective strategies to reduce violence during the summer. This year is going to start June 26th. It'll go through August 9th. Wednesday through Saturday, 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. And this means all community members. By that, we mean everybody, whether they're a gang member, they're a doctor, they're a lawyer, they're a baby, an elder. It means everyone. We do hire youth squad members, kids from that neighborhood. They're not kids 17 to 21. We extend the programming, lots of activities. And gang intervention, there's a dedicated team for each site. And of course, we work closely with LAPD. So those are the components of the program.
On the Summer Night Lights program, I've seen it firsthand down at the harbor when I worked as a senior lead officer, the amount of work that goes on pre and post. Why is that so critical in the overall success of the Summer Night Light program?
Well,
and for the record, we've been joined by Reginald Zachary. We worked together for many years. Reggie, thanks for being here.
Well, what we found out looking at data is this. You really need year-round work. It's impossible to prop up a Summer Night Lights program and in May, roll it out in July, and expect that intervention, mayor's office, LAPD, all of the components are going to have those embedded contacts in the community. So, the best way to think of Summer Night Lights, and if I could go back for a minute to this, the analogy I use is that these are all instruments of the same piece of music. You take one out, it just does not sound the same. So I know Summer Night Lights is very popular, but it doesn't live by itself. And so that's a concern that we've always had, because the program has become so popular that people tend to think that that is the penicillin pill, and there isn't. Summer Night Lights takes year-round planning. It takes having the contacts on the ground, and it takes other services as well. This is the data about SNL over the years. 2008, we were at 8 parks. The left column has the overall gang reduction. The next column, reduction-related, gang-related homicides, attendance, meals served, and jobs created.
These numbers don't lie. I mean, I tell you, with these homicides, we know we're dealing with a human life here.
We are.
Incredible.
And just to end up with this before I take some questions, I think it's important to look at Summer Night Lights. Obviously, data doesn't console a grieving parent, so you can't really put a price on a life. But the Rand Corporation did an analysis of what it actually estimated cost of processing one gang-related homicide. These are the lowest estimates. $1.2 million per homicide. So if you look at SNL, and this is the 2012 figures, it's having 9 fewer homicides. Besides the savings to families and the grief and all of that, it's a savings of over $11 million to the city. An assault cost the city $19,000 to process. There were 47 fewer aggravated assaults. That's nearly $1 million. And then victim shot, it's 81,000, almost 81,500 per victim shot. So what did we spend last year? We spent $5,920,000. 50% of that came from the private sector. So really the city funds were 50% of that. I think the data speaks for itself, but also the cost-benefit analysis speaks for itself.
Sure.
So again, I think what I want to close with is that we have made tremendous progress, and we have a tremendous amount of work to do. This is not by any means a finished product. It is a work in progress, and there's lots of things that we need to keep revisiting. So that's a quick overview.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that overview. Do we? I know that each community has its own separate needs, and how does the GRID office evaluate the overall program based on the assessment from the communities?
Well, we started with just looking at quantitative stuff, quantitative data, and I'm not a researcher, but I learned that wasn't telling enough of the story. So we're now looking at quantitative and qualitative, meaning, for example, we know that 42% of the referrals to the prevention program comes from family and friends. Therefore, families are feeling like this is a good program to refer people to. 39% come from the schools. So basically, in the secondary prevention program, we can tell that the real focus of the work is working with families and working with schools. That's how most of the kids get identified.
What role does LA Unified play in the GRID program?
Well, they basically, 39% of the kids that come to prevention programs are referred by them.
Any funding sources from the school district?
We don't get any funding source from the school system.
Do you know why? If it's benefiting nearly half of their student body?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's half of their student body, but I think that...
I'm sorry, what did you say, 40%?
Well, meaning that 40% of the kids that get referred, this is out of a pool of about 9,000.
I see.
So, I think I have two answers for that. One is that, school systems have their own rhythm in doing things. What we do with the school system is... besides accept referrals from them, whenever there's an incident of violence near the school, then there's a different kind of protocol that gets implemented.
They're more focused on campus.
They are.
I did notice you in the level 1 risk assessment, if you can go back to that slide, you indicated that the level 1 are probably the most challenging the part of implementing this program, and that's a serious and chronic offenders and gang leaders. And I know you've traveled the world about your efforts here in Los Angeles. What can we do to address those challenges in the level 1 risk assessment?
That level refers to people that are in and out of prison, and we don't have access to what goes on behind the prison walls. So with that level, I mean, there is effective reentry programs for juvenile offenders. But for the hardcore gang involved for many years, I think the rest of the country and most of what I know about Central America, that's what everybody's grappling with. That's a really difficult. We have some grants to focus on that, but frankly, we didn't, other than the residential models, like the Missouri model, we didn't really see a community-based model that was being, that really had access behind the walls. Reentry should start the minute somebody gets arrested. We generally find out when they're at the door.
All right.
So we've been working on that.
So what can the city do better to address that as a city family?
Well, I think that it's, from my perspective, it's a county and state issue. We need to be more involved at a county and a state level. I think that, for example, we know that with AB 109, the two areas more saturated with people coming out is South LA, which has had, I believe the numbers are around the 15,000 mark, and the central area. And I'll have to check back on those numbers. I don't have them committed to memory. So, but here's a problem that happens with AB 109, or with people coming out of prison. And this is a story, I'll just call him Reggie. Reggie, and this is an actual situation that happened. Reggie used to be in Baldwin Village. He was, doing some stuff on the ground. He does a couple of years. His last arrest was for a minor offense. But he's got issues on the ground within his gang and within a adjoining neighborhood. Word gets out that Reggie's coming out. You get a spike. Reggie actually never comes back to Baldwin Village. We're tracking Reggie somewhere else. And then Reggie's relationships in Baldwin Village get inflamed. So what I think intervention is doing is, because they're so connected to relational networks, to say that there's, 45,000 gang members in LA doesn't tell us what to do, because it doesn't count associates, affiliates, friends, families,
Right.
boyfriend, girlfriends.
Right.
So in the case of Reggie, the word that he was coming out created a spike. People started settling old issues, and we're tracking Reggie, who actually went to stay in the valley with his girlfriend, and meanwhile Baldwin Village is heating up.
Right.
So the whole reentry piece, I think the next phase of development has to be being able to impact and influence county and state policy.
And as far as statistics, and it's something that we've talked about with staff here, is trying to quantify well, let me rephrase this. The work from the gang intervention work, the workers on the street they do incredible work.
They do.
But once a homicide occurs and they get wheeled out and they squash the rumors, how can we quantify that?
That's very difficult to do, to prove that you prevented something. Now, we see it happening all the time, but from a research point of view, it's very difficult to pinpoint. There's a second component. Gang intervention does more than just interrupt violence. And we've had this discussion recently that they do a lot of redirecting guys into a different kind of lifestyle. They're the ones that engage the guys to do that. They're the guys that... so I think that's one of the measurements that we should focus on. The violence reduction piece is going to be qualitative, meaning that they responded to X number of incidents, they showed up, all of that. But to really connect that what you did prevented a homicide from a research point of view, not from a common sense point of view,
Right.
is very difficult. So we're looking at some other areas like, basic stuff. How many guys have been referred to get a driver's license, an ID? How many of them have been referred for job training, tattoo removal? How many of them have been reconnected to their families? All of that. I personally believe that is an area that we're having a lot of discussion with intervention now about, how do we make our case?
Right.
And it's very important to make our case. And how do we do it with numbers? And having said that,
Because with good numbers and we can prove, I say we get more funding.
correct. And and part of this council member has been that there isn't a national level evaluation that has really dug into intervention. The biggest evaluation was done in Chicago, and they're really measuring case management stuff. Now, for those of us who get to see what they do, there's hundreds of incidents that we know things have been stopped because people have been arrested with a car full of guns and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So besides quantitative, we need to be able to tell that story.
Right. Guillermo, the gang injunction and how it plays a role in the city of Los Angeles. Do you have a city attorney assigned to the grid?
We work, we've had a very close working relationship with individual city attorneys. Gang injunctions.
You don't have one assigned specifically to the grid office?
Well, we work with Ann Tremley. We used to work with Bruce Reardon.
I remember Bruce.
Yeah, but mainly Ann Tremley is the one that we go to because we've been at lots of community meetings with her and all of that.
And what I've seen, a number of individuals who are in the gang injunction have now been a productive member of society,
Right.
are putting food on the table, providing for their families, and a number of tattoos have been removed, completely separated from the gang life, moved out of the community. But it was shocking to hear that we are a number of these individuals who've turned their lives around have not taken advantage of being removed from the gang injunction.
We've had lots of conversations with the city attorney's office. I think one of the challenges is, in my opinion, that the petition for removal from gang injunction, it's not really a form. It's a process that people have to go through. And we focus on behavior. We don't focus on identity. So when you have a form that requires that somebody renege their neighborhood, some people may be absolutely law-abiding citizens, but will not go through that. There's something that I equated to, there's some immigrant groups, for example, that don't become citizens. For them, the idea of reneging where they're from, it seems alien. And I think there's a little bit of that, and I think we need to revisit the form, and we need to provide supportive services to help guys fill out the form and to really understand what it's about. The gang injunction piece, city attorney designs them, law enforcement enforces them. We've had lots of discussion within the office about it. The only time that we really have a voice in the enforcement of gang injunctions is during the summer, when they are very relaxed and they don't get enforced during SNL. Mm-hmm. But that's going to require a new partnership with the city attorney's office, and it's a difficult issue. If I could go back, you had asked me about individual communities. Initially, there was an assessment done about individual communities. Those assessments need to be refreshed. I think that one of the conversations we've had with the incoming administration is the whole issue of, can we kind of look at the whole panorama again? Because what we started to do in 2007, things have changed. So the individualized portion of a community-based program is in part driven by the community and driven by those assessments. So the assessment of a grid zone like Florence Graham, which is much larger, has to be different than what you would do in, say, Nickerson Gardens, which is a much tinier grid zone.
So as a senior lead officer in the harbor area, when word got out that Toberman or parts of the harbor area were not identified a grid zone, I kind of took a I was like taken aback because it seems like we had to wait for an increase, a spike in violent crime to be identified as a grid zone. I mean, what's your response to that? We shouldn't have to be proactive. I'm sorry, we shouldn't have to be reactive and wait for a spike in homicides to be identified as a grid zone.
I think that the basic bottom line issue is this. I think we have been in a very privileged position in LA that council and the city has been willing to invest roughly $21 million a year
Yeah.
in this program. However, when I say that number to people, they go, "Oh my God, you guys are getting a lot of money." That's out of a $7.9 billion budget.
Right.
So it's really an issue of funding. I think with SNL and with grid zones, the grid zones, my understanding was they were established to actually develop a model and an approach. We have not gone to scale. So we don't have, there are more than 12 pockets of violence throughout the city, and there are way more parks that we should be at. But I think, as I understood it, our initial task was to make the case that if you do a comprehensive strategy, you involve community members, you involve law enforcement, all of that, that this problem is addressable. But we clearly have not gone to scale. And the talent is there. What we're missing is the dollars.
Right. Got it.
So it's not fair that we have to pick parks based on who's got the most crime, and we got to pick grid zones by. So yes,
just the need. Right?
It's
need assessment. You mentioned earlier about the new mayoral administration coming in. What plans are in place from your office in transitioning over to the new administration?
Well, we've had initial meetings with the mayor-elect and his transition team. They are very supportive of the work we do. They very confident that we can continue to do the work. My personal position is basically I serve the mayor, and I serve the communities that we serve. So I haven't looked for another job, and I'm intending to be around until I hear otherwise. So far we've been told move forward, do what you do, and but clearly the new administration is extremely supportive of this work.
It's great to hear that. I'm going to I have a few questions on intervention prevention, specifically dealing with youth. So the youth that don't pass the Youth Services Eligibility Test, otherwise known as YSET, being referred to appropriate city entities, how are they being referred to appropriate city entities such as CDD and other community-based agencies?
They are being referred.
In fact, let me just one step back. I know you have a slide on the YSET. If a kid walks in, just walk us through that YSET process.
It's a structured interview, and I think for those of us, I basically have been a practitioner all my life. When the YSET was designed, I was probably the biggest critic in the office of the YSET. And I spent a tremendous amount of time looking at about 20 years of research. It's the closest thing we have to predicting gang membership. It is not by far perfect. So usually there is a structured interview that takes place, and that gets evaluated. In LA, there are 9 risk factors that have been proven empirically to predict gang membership. And if a youth has 4 or more, he and his family will receive services. This year we're focused.
Where does a kid go to at one of your?
One of our providers. It's
okay, got it. You walk into one of your providers at us.
So what we fund is 1 prevention implementer and 1 intervention implementer in each grid zone. So Reggie walks into community build. His mother sent him. His teacher sent him. He gets evaluated. If he in fact is at that high level of risk, he gets an individualized plan. The difference between primary and secondary prevention is really an individualized plan. Should we be investing more money in primary prevention? Yes. A lot of the issues that we're facing in sort of moving to the next step have to do with, for a city that's over 400 square miles, it's got over 4 million residents, our funding is a drop in the bucket. We do raise, we're fundraising all the time,
Right.
but we need more primary prevention programs. We need more grid zones. We need more effective, I wouldn't say more effective, proven reentry programs for adults. And we need more parks of different sizes. They could have a version of Summer Night Lights. So
back to the question, if a kid does not get approved by the YSEP model,
he gets referred to, most of the agencies that we fund have different programs.
Okay.
So he may get referred within that agency, he may get referred to another agency. We're now tracking, or we have been tracking for about a year, what happens with those kids in terms of risk factors. Again, while this is one of the more advanced models really in the world about secondary prevention, all of this is a work in progress. And all of it we need to keep constantly looking at it and looking at data and not assume that we have arrived.
Got it.
This is a work in progress.
In the budget that's been approved, I see that $500,000 goes to prevention service providers, while $1 million per grid zone, $1 million goes to per grid zone. Can you explain why the service providers get $500,000 while prevention service providers get $1 million, even though the interventionists are on call 24 hours and 7 days a week and get deployed immediately?
Well, I don't want to minimize or I think the issue, the way that I look at it, the issue is not so much that one gets more than the other. I think the numbers are actually lower. Prevention now gets 800, and intervention in the new budget will be getting closer to 6. How that formula was created?
$600,000.
Yeah.
Right.
How that formula was created was percentages. If we assume that the highest percentage of kids that are gang involved are 15% of the total population, that means that there are more, 85% of kids. So it's
Makes
not
more sense to dedicate more services.
correct. And a decision was made, it was a policy decision to invest funding in preventing rather than on the back end. In terms of responses, we do look at the number of responses of gang intervention throughout the city, and it fluctuates. Right now in South Bureau, we're having a heck of a hard time, and everybody's on around the clock.
Right.
That is not always the case. So should intervention, in other words, that's how the policy was made.
Got it. I know there's a number of training academies across the city in dealing with gang interventionists. Given the fact that there are other trainings going on in the city, how is the mayor's office working to recognize and certify trainings not associated with the LA Violence Intervention Training Academy?
I think back in 3 years ago, before we had a certification process, the city decided to put out an RFP and to fund a certifying body.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it was the various training platforms felt that they had a different philosophy, one from each other, and so people applied separately. And with the procurement process, you usually have a winner and a loser. That's not necessarily the best way to do business, but that is the procurement process. So should there be more than one certifying body? that's a policy decision that, will need to be reviewed. The real issue becomes, do all intervention workers have a common practice? And so that contract will will be going for RFP again, because that contract starts in January. So it's been 3 years, and there will be an RFP put out for training.
When can we expect that? Sometime this...
Probably by November.
I don't know.
I think that there's a fixed timeline that people have to have.
And the contract's good for every 3 years?
It's renewable up for
Renewable.
3 years, yeah. All the contracts are renewable. They're generally 3-year funding. So the real policy issue is, should there be one certifying body in the city? Should there be one or multiple, or...
Who's involved in that process of awarding the contract?
Well, it's an independent panel. For the current contract, we actually, there was a committee put together primarily from people from other parts of the country, because it wasn't possible to find a panel that was knowledgeable about intervention, that wasn't involved in intervention. I don't get to vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very difficult birth, I would say, to a training platform. I think the city is now sort of acknowledging that a certifying body is needed, but the real issue for discussion is, should there be more than one body or just one? If we look at other certifying bodies in other professions, there's usually one.
Mm-hmm.
There is one police training academy that's the law bar. I'm not an attorney, but
And was
there's one.
this ad hoc committee instrumental in putting that body together, or was it the mayor's office at the time?
The review panel?
Yes, the review
Yeah, it
panel.
was actually put together by the mayor's office in collaboration back then with, it was all reviewed through Tony Cardenas's office. There's not a whole lot that we're capable of doing without legislative support.
Mhm.
So,
It's important to have that smooth transition once the contracts expire, and make sure it's done the right way, as we all know, and
Yeah.
this is how the city works.
yeah, I think there's a larger issue.
An
of-
equal opportunity for
Yeah.
everyone.
I think there's a larger issue of procurement that needs to be
Mm.
reviewed. Do you use the same procurement process for the city?
Mhm.
If you're building a bridge and if you're contracting gang intervention workers?
We've grown a lot in the last 3 years, haven't we?
We've learned a tremendous amount. I think as much as we celebrate the accomplishments of this office, this is fairly new. The office was really fully funded in 2008. I took over the office in September 2009, and we have a direction that we're moving in, and but all that, we need to keep reviewing it. We need to keep reviewing it and really kind of trying to listen with an open ear.
Right. Well, I want to thank you, sir, for
Thank you.
your time and your knowledge and your commitment to our city, and
It's an
the
honor.
incredible work that you've done since 2008. We thank you for your
Thank you.
dedication and service.
It has been an honor.
You and your team as well, Reggie, as well. And with that, do we have any cards?
No, sir.
No, sir. Great. It's
I
great
do
to-
want to make sure that we get these numbers on the record.
Yes.
AB 109, 1,327 have been released to Central Bureau, 1,523 to South Bureau, 458 to West Bureau, 1,000 to the Valley. So we've had a total of 43,008 AB 109ers that,
Wow.
yeah.
That's, Michael, I'm going to throw something at you. Can you, I know Congresswoman Karen Bass just had a town hall, was it? A seminar last week? A congressional forum. Can you just give us some highlights? I know you attended that. Is your mic hot? And just before I know some people are filling out cards now, so I'll give them a few minutes to do that.
So I do know Congresswoman Karen Bass had a congressional forum a few weeks ago. The main speaker was Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. It was all around the issue of reforming the criminal justice system and looking at misdemeanors and some other legislative things that could happen on a federal and state and local level. So it was well attended. I think the grid office was there. Yeah.
So ultimately, we need the collaboration and partnership with all levels of government in this issue, and especially if we need to direct some policy to improve the quality of life, not only in our communities, but also with our kids as well. I see some of my family members from Watts here, JJ and Dr. Perry Couch, and they've been instrumental in the Watts Gang Task Force. Thank you so much for being here. If you do have a card, please bring it forward, and I will call your names. You will have 2 minutes to speak. And thanks again, Guillermo. Appreciate it, sir. Thanks, Jenny. I'll bring up from the Youth Justice Coalition, Julio Marquez. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
So first, I want to say thank you for the presentation to Mr. Guillermo Cespedes. A lot of the information there really stood out to me. One of the things that was said was how programs like the Summer Night Lights programs aren't enough without a lot of collaboration with another, more departments and more community support. And some of the things that we've been doing, not just locally but in the state, with the Youth Justice Coalition, has been really trying to pass a lot of different Senate bills and Assembly bills that we've sponsored in relation to a lot of what it's public safety and education, because everything is really interconnected.
Can you email me that some of that legislation that you carried in Sacramento?
Yes.
And I'll have you connect with Jenny.
Yeah, we also have some packets that Ms. Kim McGill is passing right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and it has a lot of the bills and the information, and really it would be really important for us if you could also really write letters of support for a lot of this stuff. As a young person, I've experienced a lot of what it means to live in LA. I live in the Watts area, South Central. And really what we need to start doing is having that collaboration, like what you were saying, but also making sure that the community is the one that's really driving a lot of these efforts, and it's the one that has the biggest voice there, because who better to know what's needed than the community. So we need to start figuring out how we could develop a youth development kind of program that's run by the community and not by outside sources that don't really have that relationship, because as social creatures, that's what we're all about, building relationships and building that community that we all want to have. But
Right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julio. And Kim, come on up. Thanks for being here, Kim McGill, Youth Justice Coalition. Thank you for the packet.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity also. And I also live in Watts, so appreciate you being my councilman.
Great. Thank you.
We just wanted to make 4 strong recommendations. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. One is that even though Los Angeles' GRID program is really nationally and internationally recognized, and we're huge supporters of it, we still invest a lot in a war on gangs, and that a war on gangs is primarily a war on young people of color. So gang injunctions, for one, we now have 71 neighborhoods and 43 injunctions just in the city, and many more in the county. We still export that as a model throughout the state and throughout the nation. When we look, we released one report, which you have in your packet, on who's on the gang database, which is a huge feeder into gang injunctions, and now prove that young people as young as 10 years old are on the gang database. We're carrying a bill at the state level, 458, which is the first time in history. I'm not saying this to brag, but more out of concern, that it's the first time in 25 years that the gang database has even been challenged, and that gang injunctions still are not challenged really effectively at the state level. We're also going to be releasing data soon to show that gang injunctions were not put in place either in the county or the city in areas that were experiencing the highest level of violence, but in areas that were experiencing gentrification. So this goes back all the way to 1983, and it continues with most recently the injunction that's being proposed for Echo Park. Not when Echo Park is experiencing the highest levels of violence, but when Echo Park is experiencing the highest levels of gentrification and the rebuilding of the park. So that's one thing that we really encourage your committee to have full hearings on and to address as a policy that we think really destabilizes communities and families. We've also been starting to do surveys in all the Injunction areas in LA City, and what's consistent for us is when we go out on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon in the middle of a beautiful day, those Injunction areas are empty. What's beautiful about Summer Night Lights is that it brings people in without the threat of violation. But in areas where Summer Night Lights is not going on and there's that threat, people can't use their community at all. Similarly, we think that the gang database needs oversight. While it's not specifically an LA City policy, it's a lot that your committee could look on.
Finish your
Can I
thought.
go for a little quick?
You can finish your thought. Go ahead.
All right. And then there's 3 other areas we encourage you to look at, which we can't go into detail on. One is to support what's happening at the school district level, but expand it and monitor its implementation to address the school-to-jail track, to dismantle the school-to-jail track. That would include putting intervention workers in all the schools. It's been a much more effective policy for us at our school, for example, which is created for young people coming home from prison and from that have been pushed out of other schools, than it is to have police officers in schools. Of course, where police officers exist, you have much higher rates of school push-out and school arrest and school suspension and expulsion. Intervention workers, you can get 3 times as many intervention workers as you can for one rookie law enforcement officer with their car, uniform, and salary. Lastly, to really build a youth development department with the county. We still lag far behind the rest of the nation in terms of supporting and investing in youth development. A statistic we consistently like to just highlight for people is that we just had 1% of our major law enforcement departments in LA County, not all our small departments, but just LAPD, LA County Sheriff's,
Maybe
probation.
tell me that.
Yeah,
Their
that's
budget.
$100 million a year that could create a youth development department.
Tell me that.
And while the GRID program has been an incredible step forward in terms of youth jobs and youth investment, it still is not even close to what's invested in other counties and cities. So I think you said 5,000 jobs, summer jobs through GRID? Yeah. At a time when New York City, for example, had 50,000 summer jobs.
Got it.
So,
Thank you, Kim.
okay, thank you.
I really appreciate you being here.
One thing I would just encourage is that you have opportunities for the community to have real slide presentations, opportunity to present their data, real hearings on those issues, because that hasn't happened in City Council in the past.
Okay, we're going to try to change that. Thanks, Kim. Dr. Perry Crouch from the Watts Gang Task Force. Thanks, Perry, for being here.
One of the things that I brought to the attention is
Speak close to the mic.
one of the things is to have a sit down with the governor, also with the county, and also with Kamala Harris, as it relates to AB 109. Because when they did it, they just sucked it in a vacuum. They never had an exit plan. And like he said, there's 43,000 people that have been released from prison and just throw it in the community. And that's really not fair, because what has happened when you see the spike is because people come home and they be in the desperate mode. Because a lot of times they can't, especially in public housing, they can't, with all of the one strikes and stuff like that, they can't come back. Because, under the rental agreement, people ain't talking about losing they place because now you decide to get your life together, but you was a Tasmanian devil, and then you did but they never sat down and had a debriefing before they send these people out. In other words, having a clearinghouse, so when people come out, they're already on fire. They got Social Security card, identification, and also a referral network. What that does is when people get out, you tell them, okay, go to DMV. They go to DMV and they got to sit in there 2 hours. You ain't going to see them again. And then they have a 60-day room where they on fire. And then after that 60 days, then, it's on and crack, and they going back to them old tapes going to play back. So I propose that with the incoming administration, that we had to sit down with these people, with the governor, who's willing, and also with Kamala Harris, and then we can get the funding from all entities that we need to team up, and then we can really take this to the next level.
Thanks, Perry. Great suggestions. Okay, Reverend J.J. Jones, thanks for being here from the Watts Gang Task Force. Welcome, sir.
Bless, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about the new leadership and, of course, we worked alongside for long enough to know
Right.
that I'm excited about the possibilities now and the capacity we have. I want to thank Guillermo over here for being for his integrity and for him for his presentation. I think we've come a long way. As we said, we got a long way to go, and one thing we're going to have to visit that quantify our work, and that's not going to be easy. I'll give a quick example. We had a situation, true story. Deputy mayor. One of the deputy mayors called me. I was in Louisiana, called myself on vacation. Her mentally challenged cousin, 17 years old, had actually was on the telephone, made a remark, called the young lady a bitch. And her cousin, the young lady who called the bitch, cousin had to be a Crip. And she gets on the phone, calls her cousin and tells what he done. And they actually literally, he got 3 guys on a bicycles, and they went up to try to find the house. And the only reason why they were trying to find the house, the deputy mayor didn't call the police. She didn't call the mayor. She called
you.
me.
Right.
Okay, and we were able to make that I was able to get on the phone, make the contact, and intervene and eliminate what could have happened. Now, how do we quantify that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's so important. That's something that I understand it's not going to be simple, but we're going to have to find a way to quantify the work that everyone's doing.
Right.
But with that, I'm just going to say I'm glad to see everybody here, Kim, Reggie, I see Blinky back here, long time. These folks have been in the community doing the real work, and I'm excited about where we're moving, as we're moving forward. So
Thanks,
that-
JJ.
yeah, God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your service, too. And William Blinky Rodriguez, please step forward. Thank you so much, Blinky, for being here, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to have you leading the charge.
Welcome.
We heard a tremendous handoff from Tony to you.
Right.
And while the city, we've taken tremendous strides over the last 20 years. In fact, I don't believe that we celebrated enough. I mean, you know, when we start talking qualitative and quantitative, it's always interesting to me how people still can't see. I mean, the relationship between law enforcement, for example, with LAPD. I mean, there is dialogue going on that nobody ever dreamt about 10 years ago.
Right.
I mean, there's enough proactive activity going on that gives itself to data. How many community mobilization pieces are going on in the neighborhood? How many sporting events are going on with different rival gangs? How many church groups are coming together and doing peace marches? You know, and some of the stuff that Guillermo talked about with jobs and stuff. On the reentry side, on the AB 109, you know, it's not a new thing to deal with the guys coming back from the prison systems. I think one of the things we need to look at is the project labor agreements that are happening within some of the construction companies in this city and this county. You're talking about a 6%, in some cases 10% heavy barriered, and we're looking at also the local 30% local hire. And so for us in the San Fernando Valley, that's something we're really looking at. Conversations with Xavier Schlowski before he gets out of office as it relates to some of the construction sites that are happening, Universal City, also over the consolidation of all the county facilities over on Van Nuys and Sataquay. Because those are the hooks. I mean, we're working with unions right now, and we're getting the right guys to the table. We're doing pre-trainings in our facility. We just put 32 guys through the Labor's 300 boot camp, and out of those 32, it was 12 different neighborhoods. These are guys been there, done that, overdone that, that are tired, and that will give themselves to the restorative justice piece. So I mean, you can't condense this work. There's so many moving parts. You know, we say the work's always ahead. It really is a living laboratory.
Right.
But there's enough proof that gang intervention works. Why? I mean, when Guillermo started talking about, and you asked about 500 here and 1 million there, and we look at what one gang homicide costs the city of LA, you know what I'm saying? I mean, these are the numbers the city was spending when LA Bridges was around. You see, and so when you got Charlie Beck standing up at the pulpit saying intervention works, when you start dealing with local gang lieutenants that are starting to say amen in the amen corner,
Right.
I think we turned we've made some significant strides. I think more people are more understanding of what intervention is. I think the data should also speak loud, real loud.
Right.
And the fact that we're out there doing it in a coordinated effort, Where's the gray? I don't understand it, but it is an exciting time.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. I want to welcome you,
Thank you.
and I know you're going to give us the leadership we need. Let's move on.
Thank you, Blinky. Thank you so much. And as you know, I was a little bit liberal on the public comment period, and I think today we ought to be a little bit liberal on the time because today was a listening session. And I just want to thank you all for being here. And Guillermo, if you can just come to the table again, I want to, again, personally acknowledge you and thank you for your leadership. And I'll share a story with you, and then we'll close, and maybe you can help me because I struggle with this today. My wife has been a school teacher for nearly 15 years. She worked at a local elementary school, middle school. There was this kid, Miguel, in her 7th grade class. And Miguel had issues with some gang ties, dealing dope in class. My wife had to send him to a number of referral sessions and down to the dean's office. Met with mom. Dad was in jail. I come to her class as one of the career days, and I had a chance to meet Miguel in her class because every time at the end of the night we'd have war stories. She'd share some stories on campus. I'd share some stories off campus. And one call that I'll never forget was a shooting that just occurred and on 6th Street in San Pedro. And sure enough, it was Miguel with a number of bullet holes in his body. And I was tasked of following the rescue ambulance to the county UCLA. I always share the longest 5 minutes knowing who was in that rescue ambulance. The reason why I'm here today and chairing this ad hoc committee is to prevent another Miguel from getting shot and killed in our community. And knowing, I wish and I hope and pray that we had this service, the grid, available for Miguel. I know we could have saved his life. So thank you for your dedication. You, the grid workers, your team, the mayor's office, and our community members for being passionate about this issue. And I can't thank you enough for your service. And I'm so looking forward to this, taking on this role as chairing of this committee. And I know we have some incoming new members that I hope to bring with me and sit at this table with you and for you. Because at the end of the day, we want to prevent another gang homicide, another homicide, and that's our ultimate goal. And I know Blinky mentioned Chief Beck. Man, it starts at the top. You're absolutely right. To have Chief Beck embrace this concept and to know that the gang lieutenants are now working with gang intervention workers. We had a homicide in Wilmington not too long ago, and I got on the phone with Kenny Green right away. Mm-hmm. And he goes, you know what, I already spoke to Captain Alvarez. He called me. Man, it's a new day, and we need to embrace that. Thank you, God bless you, and we'll see you at the next committee meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.